Hello and welcome once again to the History of Comics. My name is Paulo, and as promised, I will be ending my current series on the history of early WildStorm comics today. It's been a six-part series so far, and I will go back to talking about WildStorm in the future. But for now, I wanted to try out different things. In order to bring this series to a close, I thought I should go out on a high note and introduce one of the best comics that WildStorm produced, which was also one of the best comics that were produced during this time frame. And I am talking, of course, about Planetary, another of Warren Ellis's creations for WildStorm. Planetary was well, I really don't have a good description for it. It's an exploration of pop culture, focusing a lot on comic books, but also on old pulp novels and movies and TV with westerns and Hong Kong movies thrown in the mix. There's a lot of things here, and this was a very satisfying read. I have to say that even though Warren Ellis is usually known as a writer who relies too much on a on a slow style, there's like there's a lot going on in each issue, and they all contribute to the story. This comic suffered through several delays during its production related to some health issues with Warren Ellis, and then forced artist John Cassaday to find alternative means of employment. So it kept getting delayed and delayed, and it having started in 1999, it was only finished in 2009 with only I say 27 issues. So let's start with this first trade. This collects the first 6 issues plus the preview that appeared in a couple of WildStorm comics of the day. And this deals a bit with also the Wold Newton concept, which ties all of modern fiction together in one cohesive universe. I'll tell you more about it a bit later. So issue number 1, it introduces our characters: Elijah Snow, Jacket of Wagner, and the drummer. Snow has apparently been living as a recluse in the middle of nowhere, and is recruited by Wagner to join Planetary. He soon meets the other recruit, the team member, the drummer, who is described as weird because he talks to machines. The drummer is one of the most interesting concepts here because even though Snow is the main hero, the drummer is the one that makes a lot of things happen. Right? But it's Jackie that as the woman of action. This first issue deals with pulp fiction. By pulp fiction, I mean actual pulp fiction, not the Quentin Tarantino movie. And introduces to Doc Brass, who is an obvious analog for Doc Savage. All of the characters here are analogs for different pulp characters. Doc Savage, the Shadow mixed in with the Spider, Tarzan, Operator Number 5, G8, and Tom Swift, I believe. Oh, and also Fu Manchu. And this issue also introduces to one of the main concepts of the series, which is the Transdimensional Snowflake that is a representation of all the parallel universes. And in this first story, Brass and his team, they have to defeat a parallel JLA in order to save the planet Earth, because the idea that this quantum computer that they created would create and then destroy realities in an effort to find the perfect one. And all the pulp heroes were defeated by superheroes, which parallels what happened in pop culture in the 1930s when the pulp heroes were replaced by superhero comic books as the main source of reading entertainment that was available in newsstands. But also acknowledges that the pulp heroes were an influence on superheroes. So the first few issues are going to stay with the theme of uncovering actually pieces of pop culture. Issue number 2 is going to deal with kaiju. And it's in northern Japan, a group of islands that are that are claimed by both Japan and Russia since the end of World War II. And the monsters are apparently dying out. They had a period between the 1940s and the 1970s, and although they still come back, they usually function as space species. We saw here the big bug monster that was it's a reference to Mothra, and also here we're going to find Godzilla. This story doesn't have much to the plot, but it allows us to see that this world, although not quite part of the WildStorm universe, it runs parallel to it. It has a lot of points in common. It's actually weirder than we can expect. Everything that we thought was fictional here happens because of the bleed, because of the transdimensional snowflake. It brings everything that is out of the ordinary into contact with planet Earth. We also see some of the characters. The main characters, they kind of have superpowers. The drummer obviously does not have a visual superpower in the way that he engages with machines to move information around and to discover information. But here when Snow and Jacketa Wagner engage the field, Jacketa is then shown running at super speed. She has abilities that would be considered human, advanced to above peak human, including super strength and speed, but also some degree of resilience. Even though she may not be completely invulnerable, as this gas attack, the way she reacts to this gas attack shows us. While Snow shows us his superpower is heat subtraction. That's one of the reasons he likes to dress in white. White is always used to represent cold, or to represent cold surfaces, ice water, and here he uses heat subtraction to turn the gas into solid. And this is, I can't remember what this one. I've never been a big fan of kaiju, so I don't remember what this monster was called. Not the marijuana, I think I can't remember really. But in case you want, I'm not going to be able to explain everything that's going on here. All 27 issues of Planetary are very dense. They're packed with information, and there is a website, Planetary, related to Planetary. It hasn't been updated since 2010, since that's when the last main collection of stories was published. But the website is still there, and I'm going to post the link in the description after this video is done. Moving on to issue number 3. Here's the cover and the Ghost Cop of Hong Kong. It's a nod to Hong Kong police movies. This shows up well. The main character, the character that the Planetary field team are investigating, is a ghost, and so Cassaday and colorist Laura Dupuis, now Laura Martin, they use some art tricks to portray him as a ghost. This is how we see the way that information is important in the concept of Planetary, and this is a siege engine that collects souls. Souls are also information, and they need to be preserved here for posterity. Another great action shot of Jackita destroying a car. Mission number 4 is a sort of popish character, or more like a turn of the century dime novel. But the character is dressed like a superhero, and the uniform is an obvious nod to Fawcett's Captain Marvel, was later brought into DC in the title Power of Shazam, DC being unable to use the Marvel trademark. This introduces us to the character Jim Wilder, who is going to be turned into the superhero on the cover. And he works for the Hark Corporation. Hark was one of the pulp analogs. He was the analog to Fu Manchu. Hark died with all the other members of Doc Brass's conspiracy, but the corporation still exists, and it's Hark's daughter Anna, who will be introduced later, that is running it, and she's going to be a sort of important character in the future. This is Brass meeting Snow, being aware of. He's not meeting Snow here actually. He's in the same facility that they Wilder to, and he's going to be talking to Snow. They share the same birthday. It's January 1st, 1900. The Century babies like Jenny Sparks from The Authority, which are a recurring theme in Warren Ellis's WildStorm comics. Wilder, as the Captain Marvel character, is tied to this shift ship that crashed on Earth 65 million years ago. And this shift ship is they don't make a connection of the sort, but it's a bit like the Rock of Ages where the Wizard Shazam lives. But there is no Wizard Shazam here. It's just the ship. The ship is lost on Earth, and she wants to go back to the Bleed, and she's going to work with Wilder to do it. This is after his transformation, which is kind of he doesn't say anything to transformation, but it's like a code word to replace himself with this figure. That's going to be explored in the future in another issue. The way they do matter transformation in order to have access to powers or equipment. Also here, even though he's the new recruit, Snow starts walking around like he owns the place and talking like he owns the place. And there's very enigmatic smiles by Wagner and the drummer show that there's more to Elijah Snow than we knew about. That's explored here in issue number 5. A nice Doc Savage cover. Doc Brass being, of course, Doc Savage, and this is how we usually portrayed in the covers. There were a couple of issues regarding this homage because the design is too close to Doc Savage's, and DC has produced Doc Savage comic books in the past, as had Marvel, but they didn't have the right to do so at this time. So with the widow's peak and the bronze skin and the ripped shirt, it was very, very close. This is their first meeting, the first time they talk. Even though they're both century babies, this is actually the first time that they engage in the conversation. But here, Brass treats Snow as if he's a new addition to the game. Their talk is interspersed here with it's like the illustrations that you used to find in old pulp magazines. Because it's not colored, you can see the art very well. It's Doc Savage or Doc Brass in this case, finding human spiders, the type of crazy science that you used to see in these magazines in the 1920s and 30s. Also, for the first time, so is the conflict with Hark, the Fu Manchu character, who was actually, even though he was a titular character in his own novels, he was also the antagonist. And this is an arc who will appear later. Once more, the main conspiracy that was allied to Doc Brass. So at this point, Snow is beginning to see that even himself is not well. There are things that he feels he should know, but he doesn't, and is going to be getting some of that knowledge, back. So issue number 6, and we have for space explorers, and they're evil here. Snow doesn't like them. They're going into the Four Voyagers Plaza, so it's quite obvious what they're supposed to represent. They're the Fantastic Four, and according to Warren Ellis, they're evil. There's a bit of a theme that the Marvel is evil and DC is good while it's here. Because the WildStorm started as part of the Image universe. There was a loose but interconnected universe at the beginning, and the characters were based on Marvel characters. The Wildcats and Cyberforce were the X-Men. The Savage Dragon was the Hulk. Youngblood were the Avengers. But after Warren Ellis started working for WildStorm on Stormwatch, he started introducing a lot of concepts that were actually analogs to the Justice League. There were a lot of Superman and Batman running around, but also analogs to Green Lantern or to the Flash and other DC heroes, and Wonder Woman as well. The characters presented here, begin with Randall Dowling, the obvious Reed analog, mad scientist extraordinaire. Here is Subterrance, one of the first villain that the Fantastic Four fought was the Mole Man, and he had a group of subterranean humanoids that he was the ruler of. Here's a better picture of everyone involved. Jacob Green is an analog for Ben Grimm, William Lather, Johnny Storm, and Kim Suskind, daughter of a Nazi scientist, is the Invisible Woman, Susan Storm. I think the door to the negative zone. And this ends with a conflict between Leather and the members of Planetary, which does not go well for Planetary. So finally, even though Alice has been exploring the idea space that is the pop culture of the 20th century, now he introduces an actual menace for Planetary to fight against. These are the Fantastic Four. They deal in advanced technologies and contact with extraterrestrial forces, and they don't use it. They use it for themselves instead of sharing it with the world, which is kind of something that we always wonder about when we read the Marvel universe. We have geniuses like Tony Stark and the Black Panther and Reed Richards, and they are obviously able to produce technologies that are more advanced than what we have in the real world. And yet everyone in the Marvel universe seems to live in the real world except for the superheroes. So why does that technology get put to good use? Finally, there's a short story here, which was published before issue number 1, but comes after. Which is a nice take on the origin story of the Incredible Hulk. A nuclear scientist was actually working on descriptive field theory in 1962, gets turned into a Hulk, and there's a reference here that he dies in 1983, which was when the Hulk finally regains Banner's intellect and starts acting more civilized. At the time when Bill Mantlo was writing the Hulk stories. That's it for Volume 1. Okay, now this is an interlude. This is Planetary Authority, both of Warren Ellis' series, and they managed to do something that's interesting to the plot. Instead of having a regular crossover where the characters meet, have the obligatory fight scene, and then move on to fight a menace, they actually, even though they're standing close to each other, they never interact with each other in the entirety of the story, which is an interesting premise. There are several nods here to pop culture. The Authority had to fight those extra-dimensional monsters taking over a town, or they refer to as assassin killer cod from outer space. This represents a bit like the first time that the Justice League fought against Starro the Conqueror. These are things that are falling off the bleed. Interaction with the bleed that's used by the Authority for interdimensional travel is actually quite dangerous because there are many parallel also creatures that live in the bleed, and the bleed is used to take over other dimensions. And that is what happened here when the writer, actually H.P. Lovecraft, manages to create a snowflake effect with his mind by writing for 30 hours straight. The rest is a typical Authority destroying alien monster from another dimension, and the Authority, the Planetary team, trying to invade the carrier, which is the WildStorm's the Authority's base of operation. It's also established that Elijah Snow and Jenny Sparks have met once in 1939, and that there are evil versions of the Authority out there. This happened between issues the second and third arc of the Authority and around issues 4 and 5 of Planetary. So moving on to Volume 2, it's quite a different cover from Volume 1, but as you can see, this one actually showcases a lot of things going around, and Volume 2 is much more simpler design, but now they're starting to introduce a trade dress, which is going to be followed by Volumes 3 and 4. So issue number 7, the plot does not get going. It's another issue to investigate a pop culture theme. This looks like the cover of a typical Vertigo comic book, either during the Vertigo's early years or before, when there was a series of titles that were interconnected by theme, and that were the basis for the launch of Vertigo. And this is Planetary attending the funeral of a man named Jack Carter. Jack Carter, who is an obvious analog for John Constantine, the star of the Vertigo comic Hellblazer, and who had debuted in a Swamp Thing was created by Alan Moore. In fact, a lot of the Vertigo characters show up, like obvious references to Dream and Death from Sandman. And here we have a lot of offbeat DC characters that were published by DC as more adult comics, including a version of Swamp Thing, obvious analog for Animal Man, for Doom Patrol. This is supposed to be Etrigan the Demon. We have the Metal Man. This is supposed to be Shade the Changing Man. He's identified here as the Shifting Man, who fell off a shift door wearing a bleed suit, kind of the way that the Madness Vest describes the Madness Vest that is worn by a Rex Shade. This is supposed to be a what was her name? The one that was Plant, a Black Orchid. Elijah Snow describes them as ridiculous. There's also a thing here that Snow does not recall Jake Carter, and Jaquita is upset that he doesn't remember. She's been trying to see Elijah do something, but they don't explain what yet. But as Elijah Snow refers to these characters as ridiculous, they were a product of the 1980s, and it's in fact revealed that Jack Carter faked his death. And this is then trying to find where Jack Carter died. They make a pentagram. You can't see this here, but the street sign reads Moorcock. Michael Moorcock, being an influential science fiction writer from the 1990s, still alive, creator of Elric. And they find out that some generic superhero is responsible for Carter's death. And he makes references to, I did want to find out that instead of getting my powers from a transcendent scientist mentor, I was grown from the DNA of Aryan super athletes and Hitler's personal sex midgets. I liked my life. There was nothing wrong with me. I wasn't hip, I wasn't trendy, I wasn't edgy, and that was okay. It's a reference to the way superheroes were forced to undergo deconstruction during the 1980s, when all of their motives were put to question, and the feet of clay were not even enough. They had to be made entirely of clay so that he could be knocked down. People usually point to Watchmen as the best known form of deconstruction, but there's actually a plot going there. The Squadron Supreme from Marvel, although less influential, is another one. But the way the Superman analog reacts, what would really set him off like that would be if he was based on on the main characters who appear in martial law. That a very acid treatment of what superheroes are supposed to be like. The funny thing is, Warren Ellis is calling himself a genius in this story because Jake Carter comes back bald and turning himself into Spider Jerusalem, because that is what is supposed to be relevant in the end of the 20th century. Moving over to issue number 8, which is talking about those 1950s science fiction B movies, the ones who used a lot of giant bugs and the 50 tall attack of the 50-foot tall woman, and the title story that the earth turned slower is obvious not to the earth stood still. The main character is someone who looks like Marilyn Monroe here, and she's a survivor from Science City Zero, a secret governmental facility that was being operated by the Four here. This is Randall Dowling, of course, and Anna Hark was present. She doesn't look happy, but she's willing to work with the Four. They do terrible experiments to political dissidents. There's a reference to this one being a writer and a screenwriter, pacifist, communist drinker, which looks like a reference to what was his name? Creator of Secret Agent X9. What was it? Oh man, who created Secret Agent X9? Who created Secret Agent X9? Right, Dashiell Hammett. There's also sounds a bit like what they do to these people is like the Tuskegee experiment, which had the U.S. government testing to see what happened to people after being infected with syphilis, even though they had a cure for syphilis. Marilyn Monroe dies at the end. She turns to dust. She lived pretty forever. So issue number 9. Here on the cover. And Planet Fiction. This is we're introduced to the previous Third Man. Well, I forgot to mention that Planetary is a 3-man team. The previous Third Man had died, and that's why they go back to bring to recruit Elijah Snow. And the Planetary is led by someone that they call the Fourth Man, but they have no idea who it is. So here's the previous Third Man, Ambrose Chase, also superpowered. He can create a distorted, localized effect of distorted gravity that can stop space and time. But he is apparently killed in this story. And disappears. Something that maybe has to do with his powers. This operation was which was to create a fictional reality and travel to it and bring somebody back, was created by the Four. The fictional character that they brought back, they never explained who it is and what it does, and he's never mentioned again, which is quite a bit of a shame. So Elijah Snow does not appear in this story, and this happened supposedly when Snow was out of the picture. Issue number 10, dreary cover. So is the first page. Obvious references to Superman, Green Lantern, and Wonder Woman. And what happens here? Now that the Planetary are going over the Four Voyagers Plaza, they find references to technology and beings that could have helped save or protect planet Earth. We have the analog, the reference to another Superman character, also to a Green Lantern character. These are the Green Lantern Corps, and this cape thingy that appears to have nothing inside is supposed to be a guardian. And of course, Wonder Woman. They created an interesting concept to how she's supposed to use her armbands. The armbands are everything. They can turn into weapons, or other types of constructs. And this uniform is going to be used later in the course of the series. William Leather kills the alien baby that is Superman, and so this world is deprived of a Superman. Apparently, because if this is supposed to be connected to the WildStorm universe, and we know that there's Apollo from the Authority, and there's Union, there's Majestic from the Wildcats, so there was always a Superman analog. They make a connection here to events that happened in Stormwatch. For example, Dowling is extracting the Green Lantern that was fused to the Blue Lantern that was fused to the Lantern's body, and he mentions that he is going to sell it to Henry Bendix. In fact, we saw that one of the characters that worked with Apollo and the Midnighter from that team that in their first mission, one of them had this lantern attached to him. And Snow is becoming upset that he should be doing more, and so he goes to talk to one of his old friends. As the Steranko cover points out, issue number 11 is going to talking about espionage, and the character is called John Storm, the way he appears. So there's an obvious Madam Hydra counterpart, the Nick Fury dying here. See the eye patch flying off, but even John Storm himself is a bit of Nick Fury, but he's also a bit of James Bond and Napoleon Solo. In fact, the way sometimes his face is drawn, from certain angles, it kind of looks like Robert Vaughn, who played Napoleon Solo in the series The Man from U.N.C.L.E. There's a lot of super technology here, which was typical of all of these characters. Bond had Q, and there was super science in Man from U.N.C.L.E., and S.H.I.E.L.D. being a comic book and not needing budget money for special effects could go all the way in crazy technology. This is the first meeting between John Storm and Elijah Snow. And another meeting again at the last stop, a bar that appeared in Stormwatch stories, where a lot of people go to have their last drinks before striking themselves to a nuclear device and having their soul, which is an electromagnetic field, erased so they can cheat the afterlife. Also reference here to Snow being on the Nautilus in 1959, the last voyage. And by getting to John Storm, Elijah Snow is finally remembering what happens to him. A lot of images are introduced here. They're going to be explored in future issues. I have a visitor here. Yes, I do recommend buying the Planetary Omnibus. I have the four trades plus the one-shot crossovers. There are two main ways of buying a Planetary right now, which is the two absolute art covers or the Omnibus edition. And strangely, both of these don't have that short preview story that it was in Volume 1, which I don't understand. This issue ends with an ominously because the Legisno says that he remembers who the fourth man is. That's finally revealed in issue number 12. Nice cover here. And Elijah Snow sitting in shadows, a large table. And he starts ordering Jackita and the drummer around. They finally understand that he remembers and he's not happy. So there's a lot of the memory gaps are slowly disappearing, and the more he thinks about it, the more he remembers. And he decides to send a clear message to the people who did this to him. Here he is admitting that he's the fourth man. He founded Planetary. He has always been the leader, and he wrote the book that is called the Planetary Guide since 1925. Yeah, that's his job, uncovering information and making sure that the entire world knows about it. So he sends a message to the four. They want him to know he's coming, and that he's not happy. So going halfway through the series, and the game is afoot. The game is afoot is an expression that is used by Elijah Snow in the next story, and I'll explain exactly why. But first, let's take a look at another of the Planetary crossovers, Planetary Batman, Night on Earth. Now, I shall do the first one was with the Authority. This is actually the third one that was published, but in terms of chronology and the theme, functions better as the second. So this was actually supposed to be a regular continuity issue. There was going to be a Batman analog, and Warren Ellis was convinced by his editor, Scott Dunbier, that it would work better as a standalone story featuring the real Batman. So they go to Gotham City. There's a Gotham City in the WildStorm universe, apparently, but we were never shown. And these are the people who work at the Planetary's office in Gotham City. A very nervous Dick Grayson and somebody called Jesper with green hair. So we know exactly what that's supposed to be. There are references to a multiverse collapse of 1986, which is, of course, talking about the crisis on Infinite Earths. They're after a criminal who has been killing people like this. He makes universes collapse in on themselves. Is the descendant of a survivor from Science City Zero, which is now is exhibiting these superpowers. He actually manages to pass between universes, but always staying around here in Gotham, in Crime Alley, and that's when they find out about Batman. Now there are fewer Batman analogs in the WildStorm universe than there are Superman analogs. Actually, the Midnighter is the only one that functions like that. So they're not the Planetary team are not entirely familiar with the concept. The Jackie here says that, and I've never seen anything like it. But she starts making references to Kiki Sex because she refers to Batman as Leather Boy and to herself as Mistress Jacket. Things like severely beating men dressed as fetish bats are all that keep me sane some days. And as soon as Batman gets ready to fight, tell me you're single. This is kind of a joke to Jacket because the Batman is usually considered to be somewhat unhinged as far as superheroes go, especially because of his fetish. He seems to have some sort of fetish. This was also mentioned in one of the Punisher Batman crossovers from the 1990s, where the Joker tells the Punisher that he knows about his story, how his family were gunned down in front of him, and he says, "I think the same happened to the Bat a long time ago, but he was a child." Because he acts like a child with all the masks and the toys, and well, the Punisher just mows down criminals. One thing that's interesting here with the localized effect is that while Batman and Jack are fighting, the universe changes again, and we have Adam West. Jacob says that you were much more attractive a moment ago. There's also a Bat female villain repellent here. Supposed to be ridiculous. Then the Dark Knight Returns Batman appears. And it's just a way of paying homage to Batman. This is the Neil Adams version. And the 1930s version also appears here. Right from the beginning, when he still had a gun. So let's move on to volume number 3. And there are some references here that function better if we explain the Planetary not as part of the WildStorm universe, but as part of the Wold Newton Universe or something very similar. In fact, I'm going to step a bit, just a moment. I forgot to grab this first. So the Wold Newton Universe was conceived by science fiction writer Philip Jose Farmer as a place where all the classic heroic characters from the from British dime novels and penny dreadfuls and later pulp fiction from the early 20th century up to World War II, they were all connected to each other either by blood or by crossovers, and they're supposed to inhabit part of the universe. And if you follow the clues, you'll be able to establish that to a variety of characters. Ellis has been doing that here, mostly by crossovers, and there's a lot of people who follow through with the same idea, either extending that database of characters, or even creating new pastiche stories with them. There's a collection of articles about it, many of which were published here, Myths for the Modern Age, that talks about a collection of articles that were edited by Wayne Scott Eckert, and he runs a website. If you Google Wold Newton Universe, you should find it easily. It appears under pjfarmer.com/something, so you'll be able to find it. And I bought this book a few years ago, and he explains a lot of connections. Quite thick too. So we're going to volume 3 and issue number 13. It starts in 1919 in Germany in a very secluded castle, and a very young 19-year-old Elijah Snow is moving into it. This is obviously supposed to be Castle Frankenstein. The character is referred to as Baron, but they could have used Dr. von Frankenstein here because it's in the public domain. This These beings also appear to have been designed by Frankenstein, although a nod to Island of Dr. Moreau is also possible. And this leads Snow to finding Baker Street in London. And who lives in Baker Street? Of course, it's Sherlock Holmes. This is 1920, so Sherlock here is very old. But it's important for Snow to find him because, as the greatest detective of all time, his investigative methods are necessary for the type of work that Snow is thinking about doing. Even though he's only 19 here, he already is already interested in weird events, and he wants to find them all and catalog them and tell the world about them. So that's why he's meeting Holmes. He also mentions that it's part of a conspiracy, and Holmes acknowledges. And one of the members of that conspiracy is Count Dracula, who Snow defeats by turning him into ice and kicking him where it doesn't hurt. This story is interesting because it fortifies the Wold Newton aspect that we had already seen with the pulp heroes, and by having the pulp heroes and the turn of the century characters in the same universe, you can connect them, and they will be connected in the future. Next issue, number 14. The covers are not portraying what's in the story at this stage, but there's an interesting point here. A walking stick, a glove of power, noise and light, and a hammer. So this is technology that was in possession of the four, but the connection here goes way beyond this being the mighty Thor. What we have here is a place where the four store their weaponry. And this scene, if you can imagine a bunch of humanoid and alien bodies here, this scene goes to something that was shown on when they discover where their alternate bodies are stored. So it's a nod both to the way that Thor's powers operate, as well as Miracle Man. And I even think that this laboratory looks familiar, and it kind of looks like it's bigger on the inside and the outside. But there's no reference to it being related to Doctor Who, but it appears to need to be that way. So we're also introduced to another member before, Kinsuskin. She needs goggles to watch when to see when she's invisible, because if she became invisible, she would not be able to see a thing. And this is how they explain how the four were able to capture Elijah Snow and impose the memory blocks on him. Issue 15 is a confrontation between the four and the Planetary team. It deals a bit with folklore. The action is in Australia, and in Ayers Rock, which is portrayed here as a frontier between between realities, and where you can have access to other superpowered beings. So first, Elijah, now that he has his memories back, he goes to take care of business that was pending from his years apart, from his years in exile, and he pays a visit to Ambrose Chase's family. Also, he can finally talk on equal footing with Doc Brass, because Brass knew who he was. This is a Planetary guide. So in Ayers Rock, Ayers Rock was explored by this character called Carlton Marvell. I think they wanted to talk about Charlton and Marvel here a bit, but there's no obvious reference. There's a website that talks about Planetary. They made some annotations, and they mentioned that it kind of looks a bit more like Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon, but and there's a mention here of the year 1932, which is sort of when Martin Goodman started publishing pulp on his own. So by drawing out they draw out the four, and Ayers Rock turns into a superpowered god. But this is an opening salvo, another opening salvo in the Elijah Snow's war against Randall Dowling in the Four. Issue 16 both advances the plot and allows Ellis to talk about another piece of pop culture. And now it's time to cover martial arts movies from the 1960s and 70s. This is Ark's ancestor, who has a very acrobatic forms of see better now here, acrobatic forms of martial arts that is awfully exaggerated, as is typical of this type of martial arts movies. The action then switches to the present, and this is Anna Hark finally introduced in the present, and talking to Elijah Snow. Snow comes here as a friend, but also with a warning that she must disassociate herself from the Four. The thing about Anna Hark, so she's Hark's daughter, and like Fu Manchu also had a daughter, Paolo Sui, who was sort of immoral. She was as ambitious as her father was. She was willing to betray her father because she was in love with Dennis Nayland Smith. And when she's used in Marvel's Master of Kung Fu series, she eventually betrays Fu Manchu for good and goes to work for the British intelligence agencies. Although you might consider that she's not entirely trustworthy even in that position. But like she has a change of heart, and this series is good to establish that Anna Hark deep down wants to save the world regardless of her methods, and she responds to Snow here with a smile, and she finally gets to find out what happened to her assistant James Wilder, who is back here. The guys who did the Planetary annotations website seemed very fond of Wilder and wanted to see a lot more of him. They kept mentioning it a lot. So next story, and issue number 17, and a nod to Tarzan. This is the cover of the pulp magazine where Tarzan first appeared. He goes to the city of Topakray, which is supposed to be equivalent to Opar from the Tarzan novels. Opar is a former Atlantean outpost that has gone down to savagery after the fall of Atlantis and the Great Cataclysm. But here it's a super science city that is stuck in the heart of Africa. A bit like Wakanda, they are isolationists and they don't want to mix with other people, although they are quite civilized. Each they have to deal with other people. So, and we're finally introduced to once again to the Tarzan analog that was first seen in issue #1. This is Lord Blackstock, born Kevin Plunder. He was raised by apes, and he's also a century baby. The name Kevin Sack is a bit of a nod to Khazar. Khazar was one of several of Tarzan imitators that appeared in pulps, and he was created at one of Martin Goodman's magazines. And later was, of course, used in comic books, both in the Timely era, and then Jack Kirby brought him back in an X-Men story, and he became an important part of the Marvel Universe as the guardian of the Savage Land, prehistoric jungle that exists in Antarctica. So Khazar in present Marvel continuity is called Kevin Plunder, and the Tarzan analog here is Kevin Sack. So a bit of a joke. Another character introduced is Aneka. She becomes a lover to Elijah Snow, and she's a bit forceful. She's sort of like the Priestess La from Opar in the Tarzan novels. And in the end, Opar Cray gets shut down because after Snow left, she had a tryst with Blackstock, and they had a daughter. This is a bit of also a bit of a nod to the Wold Newton Universe, because it's usually understood that Modesty Blaze is the daughter of Tarzan and the Priestess La. It's also revealed that this baby is Jaquita Wagner, and even though Elijah puts her with adopted parents in Germany, he helps raise her, and he's sort of her godfather. Issue #18 is a reference to Jules Verne. John Storm appears again, but what they do is they go after the cannonball that was launched from somewhere in Middle America, and this is a reference to one of Jules Verne's novels, the Voyage to the Moon. They also use this as an opportunity to apprehend William Leather, one of the four. So one of them is down for the count, and everything is now being set up for the final act, for the final showdown between Elijah Snow and Randall Dowling. But first, so I've been introducing these out of order, but it was better in terms of continuity, because this one is an Elseworld. This was the second published crossover, but I'm introducing here as the third, between Planetary and JLA, and the roles are kind of reversed here. As you can see, Wonder Woman is wearing that uniform that was presented early, and there's a lot more technology here that's being used by Planetary, strictly as a for-profit business, but they are the true world power. And Bruce Wayne, Clark Kent, and Diana Prince get together to try and solve this problem. They don't have heroic identities, although they follow as close as possible. Even when Bruce Wayne goes on in action, he puts on a suit that kind of looks like it's Bat inspired. In addition, so the planetary are acting like the four here. Jackita and Ambrose are the enforcers, and Elijah is portrayed more like Lex Luthor. He's even shown bald, and he has more wrinkles. It looks more like Lex Luthor than Elijah Snow. The fight scene between Jackita and Wonder Woman is quite good. She's using the bracelets that were introduced in the regular issue. We also see that the Planetary killed a lot of the superheroes. Here are all the Green Lanterns. Also out of it were Flash and Atom. And there's the Martian Manhunter also shows up here and dies. He can't survive in the Earth's atmosphere. So this JLA, they managed to defeat the Planetary, but they kind of get injured in the process, and Superman dies, or maybe not. The story could have gone on for longer. It would have been interesting if it had, but it's satisfying considering it's a lot that they managed to squeeze into 48 pages. But it's not necessary for continuity. It's just a very good read. And we finally get to volume number 4. I had to wait years for this compared to the other 3 volumes because New Planetary issues kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and it was also always a case of when Warren Ellis could devote time to writing, John Cassaday was not available for art, and when John Cassaday was available for art, Ellis had no scripts for him, and it took until 2009 until they finally got everything done. But it was worth the wait. This issue bring everything that's important to cover is covered. It's a very satisfying conclusion, and Alice manages to do a lot here. So cover to issue number 19, Mystery in Space, a nod to DC's Mystery in Space science fiction anthology from 1951. There are other references around here to 1951. These are recording angels that Snow is hiding from the world, but also using to gather information. And there's an object, and he sends them to an object in space that has its own ecosystem inside. It's been developing and evolving on its own. And this ecosystem is actually supposed to be Galactus's ship. Quite an interesting story, even if they spend more time on the concepts than on moving the plot. Moving the plot happens in the next issue. This is the first time that we don't have a chapter ending with the comic. It starts on 19 and ends on issue number 20. And we finally see the other member of the Four that had never been shown in any way, who is Jacob Green, the Thing analog. There are there's great sceneries here that Cassaday built for the Galactus analogs environment. And we finally get to see the Thing. He's angry. He seems to be in perpetual pain. He was the one that was most affected by whatever it is that turned the Four into the Four, and it does not seem to be pleasant to be him. These outgrowths, it's like he has lava inside him, and they're bursts of lava trying to go over the volcanic rock, or even worse, it's like all the organs are out of place and they're under his skin instead of being protected by any sort of skeleton. What happens here is that Snow gets rid of Green by cutting off his return to Earth by destroying his ship, and now is out of the picture. Jacket is upset because Snow seems to be acting out of character, but probably not. Not quite. He appears more ruthless, but he's always been ruthless, as we could see from previous issues, where he has no problem with destroying Dracula's crotch or killing the Madame Hydra analog, and by turning her into ice and letting her fall to the floor. So issue number 21, and it's not a regular issue. There's a lot of talk here about nanotechnology and quantum physics, and how it allows us to perceive realities in different manners. Then they start adding peyote and other mind-altering substances as a means to get into contact with that infra-reality. So for that, Snow gets together with this character called Melanchthon. She kind of looks like a female version of Doctor Strange. Also, Madame Xanadu. For our explanations, they create some interesting sceneries here. The Melanchthon's visuals are based on a musician friend of War Analysis. And this is where Snow understands his purpose as part of Earth's protection system. It's sort of an antibiotic against invasion. So it's a good issue to read. It seems like it doesn't advance the plot, but it brings out more of Snow's character into focus. So next issue, and it's the Lone Ranger. This is where they establish the origin of William Leather, and is related to the Leather brothers, who were sort of analogs for Dan and John Reed. John Reed, who was, of course, the Lone Ranger's real name. There's also a Tonto character who makes the Lone Ranger analog eat a lot of peyote. The Lone Ranger analog is a little more sinister here, and he will have a century baby who is called Brett. Brett is, of course, a reference to Britt Reed, who was the Green Hornet. So, but this does not look like the Green Hornet. As is finally explained here, the Shadow analog, which had a bit of spider thrown in, is actually the Shadow, the Spider, and the Green Hornet. And it's a very good idea to get all three merged in one, because it shows that there was a lot of creativity going on in pulp stories. It was also all coming from the same place, and they end up creating the same characters separately. Or sometimes it's mandated by sales when an editor says, give me another character just like that, and that's how we end up with a lot of vigilantes with white brim hats and a way to conceal their identity. Of course, the Shadow and the Spider were pop characters, while the Green Hornet debuted on the radio, like the Lone Ranger. And what they finally explain here is that the Shadow character's wife cheated on him, and instead of being the son of a century baby, William Leather has no powers whatsoever, and that's how he ended up working for Randall Dowling. Issue number 23, that's Armageddon cover. Looks like Bruce Willis here. It really does. And we learn a bit more what it's like to be the drummer. He's always getting information from everywhere. You can't avoid reading it. And this is where we discovered the drummer's origin story. He was an orphan whose entire family was erased, and he's the only one that can process the same degree of information that the internet generates. This is in the early beginnings of the internet. There's a lot of boys that look like they have the same abilities as the drummer, but none of them has the same abilities to quite an extent. And well, they don't. Dowling does not want the kids to be rescued, so he starts killing them by blowing up their heads. Quite gruesome, in fact. Yeah. Only the drummer was saved, and he starts working for the Planetary Foundation. He's shown here that he does not relate to people in the same way that he relates to information. Like he's always somewhere else and always getting input. And it's a bit like people nowadays where they can't put down their cell phone because they need to take another Instagram picture, or they need to check their Facebook status or send another tweet. And the drummer is a physical representation of that. And that is why, even though the drummer made fun of Elijah Snow in the first issues when he was still when he still had memory blocks, the drummer is actually very loyal to Elijah Snow. So issue number 24. This is what a Planetary guide cover would look like, and we're getting ready for the end of the story. They're in a hideout in Brazil where they have a where Elijah Snow gets a lot of his information, and he finally tells Jaquita everything about her parentage, both as a daughter of both Blackstar and Aneka from Opak Ray. And Snow also explains to the team that he's come to terms with his function as part of the Earth's immune system, that he's supposed to save people and things. He saves, by being interested in the weird, he saves precious information. By looking for that information, he ends up saving other people's lives, including Jaquita and the drummer. And now he's going to save Ambrose Chase, who apparently died, but maybe not, because the drummer swears he activated his time distortion field, so he may still be alive there. But before they do that, they have to take care of the Four, especially because the Four tried to kill them and failed. And Snow has had enough, and he confronts John Storm about helping the Four instead of Hannah Hart. He has actually been working for the Four. He tries to get away. He actually has an analog of Satan's Claw. It's called the Devil's Paw here. And they managed to apprehend the John Storm, and he tells them everything about the Four, how they went through the bleed in 1961, years before the Apollo missions. This was they were using public money for funding, actually black group money, but it was always about them. Dowling knew that he was going to run into the bleed, and he was going to use the bleed to get himself and his partner's superpowers. So here we have this ginormous Stargate, who is actually something not quite a Stargate, but more like a boom tube, because that Earth has been conquered by, is inhabited entirely by superhumans, and they have exhausted all the natural resources, and this is apocalypse. In fact, you can see Darkseid's face here a bit. Yeah. So issue 26, and this is where they finally get everything resolved. One thing that they took out of, now I mentioned Stargate a minute earlier, and one thing that they took out of John Storm when they captured him, this device kind of looks like, even though it's a communication device that allows Storm to be controlled and directed by Randall Dowling. And it kind of looks like a Goa'uld who actually does the thing. He takes control of people and uses them. Another thing that connects to an idea that was introduced early on in the series by fans, but it didn't pan out, is that the Four didn't gain superpowers. There was a mention of them having children who looked like demons, but they can't have children because they were all mutated. And the idea was, and when Randall Dowling says that we're old and we're old and powerful and we're bored easily, that they were not the same people that had gone in Rocket. When they came back, they had been replaced by ancient entities from a parallel universe, which were supposed to be the many-angled ones, like Cthulhu. So they would be monsters in a human guise. It didn't pan out. Turns out they're still superpowered humans. And Dowling and Suskin finally arrive. They agree to a meeting with Elijah Snow that Snow is going to take away all their information, and they're okay with it because they're planning on leaving. The idea is that Dowling sold out planet Earth to Apocalypse in order to get superpowers, and in a couple of years after the end of the story, they were supposed to be collecting on that debt. One of the things that happens is that in an that's related to Apocalypse is that the Darkseid wants to conquer Earth because it's supposedly where he has a piece of information that he needs, which is the anti-life equation. And that's why he keeps coming back to Earth. In the end, this is a trap. And this is how Elijah Snow kills the Form. He also frees the ship chip that they're using to go to Apocalypse. And that's how they finally get rid of them. But issue 26 is not the final issue, and this is the cover to 27, and this is an epilogue where the only thing that they do is make sure that they bring back, they end with everything on a happy note. So they need to bring back the forgotten character, who is Ambrose Chase, and and he's back. They also break the time stream because, as the drummer explains, there's a lot of Schrodinger cats arriving at your doorstep at the same time, and this is what happens here. So quite an interesting nod to, if you invent the time machine, all of time collapses on the moment of the invention of the time machine, because you can move back from farther from when the time machine was invented. And that's it. So that's how it ends. One of the best comics of the previous decade, one of the best comics produced by WildStorm and produced by Warren Ellis and John Cassaday. Even with all the delays, it was something that was very good. I absolutely recommend that. If you've never read Planetary, you should. This is something that should be in every comic book fan's library. And even though I spoiled a lot of things for you, hopefully you can still be inspired to buy it and see for yourself all the richness that Ellis managed to imbue into the story. There's a lot to learn here, more than the basic outlines that I spent the last hour and a half explaining. So this is it for the early years of WildStorm. I've been doing very long videos. It was going from 30 minutes to 45 minutes on the previous WildStorm video. As I expected, I took over an hour, almost 1 hour and a half on this Planetary video. Hopefully I wasn't boring. I probably was. So if you're watching this right now, congratulations for putting up with me. And this WildStorm series is over. I will return to it later, but not right now. I'm going to do something smaller for next week. I don't know what yet, but maybe talk just a bit about another just regular comic. So I'll thank you for staying with me. I'll see you next week, and until then, keep reading old comics.